questionnaire that's used to do it. So it will be scoring highly rather than simply saying it, but it will be self-report typically.
But yeah, it's just like, I can look at these and probably tick a few and then be like, oh, I need one more, okay, yeah, that one. I thought there's got to be more to it than
yeah, so in terms of...
that's too simple.
So normally then you'd have a bit like that Carroll Riff scale, you might administer that to someone, and not sort of say, and therefore the idea is you get a more reliable and valid indication of some of those dimensions, and based upon that then you could say, well, this person is flourishing based upon their response on this scale. So rather than sort of saying, oh yeah, I'm going to just say yes, yes and yes, so I counted them flourishing. Well, that's not the way it's designed to do that. Is that okay? Any other thoughts, comments? Go on, Neil.
Just interesting that a lot of the points seem to lump a number of things in together. So, for example, number 12 has warm, satisfying, trusting personal relationships and is capable of empathy and intimacy. So you could be capable of empathy and intimacy, but at the moment not be engaging in, you know, what's called warm, satisfying relationships. So it's almost like you could end up scoring 3 out of 4, but if you were to answer that question literally, you'd say no.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So it wouldn't be a case of you get asked that question and you say yes or no to that. Bearing in mind, that's positive relations with others.
Yeah.
So we talked before about what that might include, and you've seen on the RIF scale at least, ways in which that could be measured, and it could have 14 items on a scale, and you're responding on all those items, and then overall you'll get a high or a low score on that. So it's trying to take that into account, but yes, bearing in mind in the end, you'll either get a high or low score on positive relations with others, even if that means you've been heavily influenced by the fact that, you know, some elements of it, but not other elements of it. Is that okay? So you're seeing that a large part of this is sort of building around what we've already talked about this morning. It's now adding on these social dimensions as well. And to be diagnosed as languishing then, is you score on low levels on at least one measure of hedonia, and low levels on at least 6 measures of positive functioning. So that's the method that's supposedly being used there, and the terminology again is this idea of diagnosed, the diagnostic criteria, but rather than diagnosing illness, you're diagnosing or distinguishing flourishing people from languishing. When Sarah felt as though you weren't comfortable with that?
It is. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. So, sorry. Because, so I listened to him this morning on a TED talk, and the way he described it, I thought it was going to be a lot more in depth. And I just, reading it, I don't know, it doesn't seem that really.
You're not persuaded by it.
No, I'm not.
In terms of the text, I'm not seeing the TED talk. Is it, apart from you not being convinced by it, is it worth, would you recommend it?
Yeah,
Is it a link we could share to?
Yeah, it describes him, and I'm always interested to see what the person's like,
Mhm.
how they come across. When I read like their research, I think it's just quite really interesting. And I just said to these guys that he openly admits that he suffers from depression, a bit like Sullivan as well. And I find that interesting that they write about all this positive psychology, but they're suffering so much with depression. But anyway, that's a bit of a side note. So the way he described this in the talk, which was good just for a bit of background, was like he was saying about the mental illness with the criteria which you go in, and he's applied that same theory with this side of the mental health. And I just expected more.
Okay. Please do. Please share the link though, so we can hear that.
Yeah, really cool. I just think that he had more satisfying relationships. I expected more in terms of the describing of what that was in terms of that state in order to classify yourself as being mentally healthy.
I mean, and bear in mind, he has written quite a lot, so that's why I use any of these ways of saying, okay, I need a bit more persuading. So, and TED Talks, whilst they often are designed to be persuasive by glossing over quite a lot of the detail and saying, well, to a lay audience, here's the headline message. then great, it might be enough to get you interested, but you want to look at the detail as you should be, you know, mastery and all that in terms of postgraduate study. Use it as a way of saying, okay, now if I really drill down to what and he has written quite a lot, so in terms of pointing different directions of where to read, what I've often suggested is, I don't need to go to Blackboard, but on Blackboard there, I think it's the bottom one on that list, where it talks about protecting mental health and so on. It's an American psychologist article, so in theory that should be a slightly easier read than some of the others, and it encapsulates it in there. So that's one place to start. If you still think as though there's still not enough explanation in there, I would also suggest that on the bottom of that piece of paper you've got the Keyes 2009 reference. So again, you'll see when people do write a lot on a particular topic, there's lots of repetition appearing, so often you end up picking the article, the chapter which captures it for you. That one, at least then, should be, it's in the Oxford Handbook of Positive Psychology, 2009. There's also a 2004 version, I think, or 2002, if it's an older one, but the later one has got a slightly more developed argument in there. I think we should have that in the library.
Yeah.
Okay, we had it in the library, Sarah now has it. Oh no, you got the library version or your own one?
No, I've got the library.
Okay.
There's a few copies in there.
So have a look at that then. So you're one step ahead of me. So have a look at that already and get a sense of, does that persuade you?
Yeah, I was quite interested when I was like reading and watching this talk like this. It's interesting. So I feel like it's wrong expectation.
Okay, and also, but have a look at that, and maybe then we'll, you know, your task, if you're wondering, is between now and next month, and you can report back to us and say, well, I had a look through it, and guys, yeah, I recommend reading that. That'll explain it for you, or save us all the bother. You've read it. It's not, you know.
Just in my opinion.
Yeah, well, yeah, again, it's quite useful to stimulate other people, and so let me have a look at it as well. So that in general is a good text. While you've got it, scan the other chapters, the other contributors, because it's an edited text with lots of different contributors, because there'll be other topics in there that are relevant at various times. And it's quite an expensive book to actually buy, so it's quite useful to have the library one. Go on, Christian.
What I like is when you talked about grief here, I saw the self, questions about myself, about my relationship to others, and here I also have the society inside. And I think for mental health this is very important, because in different societies I have perhaps different challenges also to master, whatever. Yeah? So without this, I see it as a circle, like self, others, and society. I think it's difficult to flourish. Yeah, because of this, I like this combination as well.
And that's great. And I think that sometimes, and that's really important as well to identify that. Sometimes you're taking a very high expectation, and you think in terms of what it's doing over and above even Carol Riff's work, it's including that and building upon it. Going back to the other work on happiness and subjective well-being, again, a large parts of those things aren't necessarily being included. How about the language in terms of diagnosing positive mental health? Something we're comfortable with and like? Or not massively comfortable with it?
No, it sounds a bit clinical.
I think also particularly talks about syndromes and symptoms.
It's definitive, isn't it?
Definitive.
Yeah, it's kind of like, that's it, that's who you are, that's it.
And I think also it's...
He's trying to reframe the language, though, isn't he? He's trying to recapture and reclaim the language to a certain extent.
Again, I think it's part of this idea of even though again he's a sociologist, and some of this again, even though these are now written in late 2000s, once positive psychology is taking shape, but bearing in mind some of the earlier work is from the mid-90s, so but some of it is that same idea of, well, we've had plenty of work on trying to understand mental illness and diagnosing and understanding that, but should we try to shift the focus a little bit, like you say, so whether it's recapturing the language, or is it playing into that same, playing into the hands really, and saying, well, we can diagnose when people actually are not just not ill, but they're actually mentally healthy.
Very well.
They're very well, they're flourishing.
That's fine, except that if you look at the DSM, say if you're diagnosing depression, for instance, it's not just all high levels, although that's what I have a problem with. It's not so much this, I have a problem with that, because that's subjective. What you consider to be high and what I consider to be high or low are not the same thing. Now, if you're diagnosing depression with a scale, it will be, if you have this many or this many, then you are considered moderately, mildly or severely depressed. That is, that, you know, it's not really diagnosing, it's giving an indication.
So, so they're talking about high levels on a scale as opposed to, I guess, presence or absence of particular criteria for
Well, high is high,
depression.
but what is high? Define for me what is high. And how, I don't understand how, it's saying high levels of 6 measures. So there's 6 here that I say are high, you say are medium, yet we're living exactly the same life from the outside, and people might, somebody else might come along and say, oh no, your levels are the same. So it's too subjective.
Well, maybe what we need to do then between now and next is explore the detail of how they're measured and scored, rather than sort of say, well, let's dismiss it because actually we're measuring by high. We may have to find someone and say, this is precisely what we mean by high. I was picking up what you were saying, that sometimes when we're looking at diagnostic criteria, is actually presence or absence of things. Is this happening, is this happening, is this happening, but this isn't happening, and that isn't the way that's being measured. It's, you know, you're measuring it, you're scoring it, and then where you decide, so there's some degree of grey area, so rather than subjective, but a grey area of where you say, this is almost trying to say a cut-off point. If you score high on this one and high on these, why 6 measures? Is that enough? You know, should it be more than 6? Should it be a particular 6 or whatever? So there's some issues there, but do recommend, first of all, that American Psychologist article is an easier read to begin with slightly, maybe moving towards the chapter in the Oxford Handbook as a way of getting more detail. But then now I need to check on the time actually. What is the time? Because if we go to this next bit, so we have the time for this, but I'm concerned at the end of a day whether I may just go into one of these, have a bit of exploration and then leave it at that, rather than trying to throw a lot of this at you, because a lot of these data and some of the figures, the graphs, are taken from that American Psychologist article, so that's something you can read more about. And it was to try and get your head around some of those images, but I want to maybe, I'm thinking now, sensing the atmosphere in the room, it doesn't feel like it should be for the last 45 minutes of what's been quite a long day. I think I'll save it for you, a little treat for you for next time round. But we'll start a bit, so it's this may show up again. In terms of some of the argument of linking some of these criteria with other aspects of health, there's a study, but again, we can argue that it's now almost 20 years old. But if we're looking at the strength of this, it's a large scale study. This size sample size for psychological research is a large sample size. So this is where we need to probably get a little bit more detail on. So they administered diagnostic measure of mental health. It was those 13 criteria. What we need to check on is exactly how it was administered. Some of these questions are relating to, well, how are you actually asking those questions? So let me check on that stuff. We'll have that more detail for next time round. But at least know that we've got measurements of mental health, by that positive mental health, alongside other measurements of, using the term there, mental disorders, psychological disorders including depression, panic disorder, anxiety disorder, and alcohol dependence. And also self-report measures of chronic or physical conditions, so things like back problems, stomach problems, high blood pressure, and so on. So they're trying to get data from a lot of people, and again, it's midlife in the US, so it's American disciplines. So again, you might even question that in terms of does this apply to other countries, other cultures. At the moment, we're looking at that particular population.